Hi, everyone. We're about to start. Welcome to Segue. Thank you for coming out, even in this very dreary weather. We're really excited to have Ron Padgett and Charles North here to read today. So we'll start with the reading by Charles, and then we're going to take a 5 or so intermission, and then we'll reconvene for Ron. And today we have the great poet Anselm Berrigan to introduce both readers. So please welcome Anselm.
Sorry I was late, guys. It's a little wet out there. Also knew this wouldn't start on time, so it's not late. Can you all hear me okay? I'll start with the facts. An active classical clarinetist in his youth, Charles North has lived most of his life in New York City. He began writing poems in his mid-20s. He's won a shitload of awards. You have to put those in your bio because that's the condition for getting them. Among his 12 poetry collections, What It Is Like, New and Selected Poems headed NPR's Best Poetry Books of the Year in 2011. And his book, which came out in the beginning of 2020, Everything and Other Poems, was named a New York Times New and Noteworthy Book. Other published work includes 3 books of critical prose, collaborations with artists and other poets, poetry chapbooks, and the poet-painter anthologies Broadway and Broadway 2, which he edited with James Schuyler. He is poet in residence at Pace University, where he's worked with a lot of people for a long time. And I would just say about the prose, which I didn't write down here, which is that there's a lot there, and I learned a lot from reading the prose, and it was also gave me some entryways into reading and understanding, not understanding, but just reading and listening to James Schuyler and John Ashbery in particular. I might have to start by admitting Met fans tend to be wittier than Yankee fans, thus tying wit to public suffering, if only in the metaphysical sense, which I imagine would tilt the cringe meter too highly towards cringe for Charles. But now I've said it. This book, News, Poetry, and Poplars, which is this book, poems and selected prose, just recently published by John Yao's Black Square Editions. Seems to be inventing a new shape of poetry book in a present form never separable from all other aspects of poetry. Okay. There are older poems, newer poems, prose pieces. To be honest, if I just read Charles' piece on Ron Padgett that's in this book for Ron's intro, then that would be more than fine. But I have to come up with something. And then there are all these things that Charles does. I'm thinking of lineups, cadenzas, liner notes, odes, parts of rhapsodies, interviews, periodic table studies, French licks, all these ways of getting into a space where poetry can happen. For me, a tone in Charles North's work is a tone that is ready for anything the writing lets in, without anticipating that anything, or its definition, or baggage. Often the work starts with a detail and an opening is created and then just pulled open across the poem. In March of 2020, when we all went into lockdown and we're dealing with it here in New York, one of the first times I just went out to go out, I left my apartment to go to Tompkins Square Park, which was nearby, and I had just gotten a copy of Everything and Other Poems. And I just wanted to read and sit on a bench. Of course, there were some people around, not very many. They were a little bent, as was I. And I had the rush of pleasure that comes with reading poetry that makes you want to write. And then I had the battle of, well, I want to keep reading, but maybe I should take my notebook out and start writing back and forth, right? Gentle battle. And I wrote something, actually. And in that moment, there's three things or three aspects of that I associate with Charles' work were just made very present in a moment of difficulty, bleakness, whatever you want to call it. Pleasure, possibility, and permission. So we go on. Please welcome Charles North.
I know most people put glasses on to read, but yes. He didn't say that, did he? You did. Okay, thanks very much, Anselm. I don't know where you went. There you are. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going alphabetically, which wasn't easy to figure out because we're very close in the alphabet. And we're each going to read for something like 25 or 30 minutes. I thought I would begin with some mostly short poems from the book Anselm mentioned, which is just out, New Poetry and Poplars. There's a reason for the title, but I'm not going to go into it, which is Poems and Prose, and then read a few from the previous book that he also mentioned, Everything and Other Poems. And I thought, given this horrible evening, that I would start with a poem titled Wind, Intermittent Rain. How about How about blowing everything away, including the dialogue meant for someone else, I'm almost certain, and the asterisks that take up unnecessary room since they aren't stars, in spite of all the attention from below. Not to speak of the impulse, as palpable as a hawk on an air conditioner, to look farther than the eye can see, beginning with show balconies a foot wide, if that, to the Art Deco spandrels nobody looks at, to the half-hidden transoms and mullions that hold up this painterly life. And this is prose called liner notes. A little in diary form, but not a diary. And I don't remember what year I wrote it, but it was May and June. 5:18, 5:10 a.m. Not such a strange time to be up when you think about it. Not littered, not all there is, but what is. 5:29. What do window treatments really know? However Edward Hopperish or even Vermeerish. 6:2. Dizzy Trout, Harry the Cat Brukeen, Hippo Vaughan, Rabbit Marinville, Moose Scouron, Goose Goslin, Ducky Medwick, Catfish Hunter. Fenton Mole. That was somebody I saw in the first baseball game I ever went to. He was a Red Sox who lasted, I think, 2 games, and I never forgot his name. June 3rd. A messy day, not sloppy. Almost no room anywhere. Clouds, hedges, paint, captions, etc. June 6th. The heartfelt peonies and their unavoidable connection to the inner life. The paint thins out the closer you get. Paper, some poster board, unlike thought and its thin bed, romaine, leaf lettuce, spinach. Restless as a side street, or the thinly quilted afternoon wondering, obsessing about coffee and whether to have an early dinner rather than wait till after the movie. The mourning dove underneath the AC, practicing the tune. How hard can it be? June 9, a Renaissance progress. Make it a convoy. June 10, all the reds, including blood oranges, to give a hint of the future, which isn't that far away. You have the right to remain unlike anything, nameable or not. Freight elevator with faux brass paneling, the afternoon of the Coleus, superhero chess piece, night, with folded cape and surprisingly heavy boots. June 21, stadium lights by 6 p.m. June 23, how do you know that it hasn't ended already? How would you know if it had? Snoop the cat has a leg up on Dreamtime. The orange hawk, more of same, came back along with its hand-painted background, barely visible through soot streaking the window pane. Quivers in her sleep. Waltz? Polonaise? Mazurka? Polonaise. This is a poem that's, well, it was sort of a first try, sort of a study for a longish poem translated from the French excerpts, which I wrote for Ron a number of years ago. And this was the first go at it. The one for Ron was called French Licks. So this is called First French Licks. Elegance, give it a chokehold. And while you're at it, sit rhyme down and pour it a double latte. Otherwise, who knows what it will be up to? Paul Verlaine. These wraiths, or are they women? How to hold on to them? Stéphane Mallarmé. Drink, sleep, die. You need to save yourself from yourself in any way that's humanly possible. Oscar Miloš. Where are the old sorrows, the ones from last year that I barely remember? If someone came in right now to ask, what is it? Is anything the matter? I'd say, I'm all right, just leave me alone. Francis Jammes. The scrawny afterlife, black with its gold trim. Paul Valéry. What's going on the pier in French? Merci, bonjour, adieu. It must be getting late. Here comes the robin who sings to me. Blacksmith's hammers in the distance. The water laps, a stertorous steamer. Enter one fly, in and out breath of the sea. Victor Hugo. I need to go higher. I can still see the stockbrokers in their granny glasses, the critics and the spinsters, the realists with their red faces. Higher still, farther, blue air, wings. I need wings. Théodore de Banville. The honeysuckle breath of their beds. Alphonse de Lamartine. Oh, I loved you, as a lizard shedding its skin loves the sun that roasts it while it lies sleepily. Love between us beating its wings. Hey, you, get out of my sunlight. Tristan Corbière. This is the last. I'm smoking, spread-eagled, nothing but night sky on top of the coach, jostled at every turn, my soul dancing like some aerial. My beautiful soul in its dance, no honey or gall. Oh, roads and little hills, oh, smoke, oh, valleys, my beautiful soul, all we once had. Jules Laforgue. Okay. I published a chapbook along with Trevor Wingfield, who may be here. No, I saw him, he's here. Which has, I think, 8 poems in it and some absolutely gorgeous drawings. In fact, I brought it, and maybe after I read one or two, I'll hold it up to show you the drawings, because it's better with the drawings. Poem. By the way, the book is called En Face. I thought it was going to be personal. I'm trying. You can never really tell. Subject lines, after all, have feelings too, like headphones, end papers, etc. On the other hand, the trains make both local and express stops, since all parts are played at all times, including the ones that silently partner in their own destruction, if I can say that. The salad bar sits with a view of the headstrong Chrysler building, while the line of gray benches has a self-destruct feature. John Clare lineup. Around the same time that we put this together, Trevor also loaned me a very large book that had all kinds of things to do with John Clare, including his gardening and all the flowers that he grew. So this is a lineup essentially of his flowers, although it's not really a lineup. It's just got nine flowers in it. John Clare lineup. 10 a.m., Super Blush. 4 p.m., the Italian Bugle with the flared moorings and stagecraft. When Fillingham's Tanta Ra Ra tangles with leaf green, everything smells of lilac-flowered bergamot. Brown's Lord Hood is on page 347. Looker's Oxonian steps up to the plate with the operatic sling. Hugh's Pillar of Beauty takes on the stream, car skating like a medicine cabinet in December, as Morning Star comes about, nudging Miss Green's pink into the poem. I don't have enough hands, but I want to show you a drawing or two. This was for the John Clare lineup. They're all spectacular. Okay. This is titled Clare Parsons, a very little known poet who died in his 20s in England. So we're not yet reformulated into old master paintings with inks and the occasional reference to forces coexisting with human possibility, however careening like wind into late sun. Oh, openness. Just say the word before the stars drop their coals onto the rust-colored doormat, given the plush that throbs and the nervous months grouped and assigned their responsibilities, distance and thrall. Limits of outdoors. How the roar of a motorcycle isn't equal to love, any more than puffs of chimney smoke dotting the boroughs, reach out to the Earth's imagined corners. There are 5 boroughs. You think I don't know that? Or that I don't take every other word out of my mouth with a grain of salt, if not a tablespoon? Even the relatively healthy window plants know what they're about, without a hint of egg tempera or Baroque halos that look like gold dinner plates. By Andrea del Verrocchio. Foothills with bands of trees, and a far-off mountain like a pale blue breast. I couldn't decide whether to read this one because I'm going to read it fast. En face. Arrows blown against the mull day, war is a meal. Who gradually plucks, and who with noise raised can edge a tantrum? For volition and essential with the ordinary beef swarms like heads, a fist accountant chimes as late as proverbs lose. Ersatz clover wore to Cornish frond. Recall a vicinity cruise while vent closes the tag. A basement love, a tithe, loss of timber to ruin mass. And evenness bikes up through livestock meeting regularly. An example place stern, above or cutting past each fret and foundry rule to flacken. That's sort of a translation. For Harry Matthews. Oh, this is 6 one-line poems. Penguin Books. Direct flight to Key West. November 13, the saloon of the poem. Oh, lower extenders. Oh, reckless fire hydrants and coffee shops. Number 3 pencil, hand holding asparagus. Then, in French, middle darks, dry and powdery, 6 p.m., almost. A la the 1940s movie lobbies with standing ashtrays. 2 more from this set. John Clare 2. Before the light and chalk stop, 1 or 2 fingertips glued to keys, so what has to be done takes its cue from the dream state with its endless car chase. The fake book practicing scales, smell of rain, the wild hurry of the autumn clouds. Fishing. Into the evening, especially if you don't count the twig-like intimacy or the front matter that would sneak out of the collected poems if it could, if no one was looking, whatever the cost to the facts of the matter, and their less than resourceful cross-hatching, amounting not exactly to tree shade, but thick enough to imperil the passage from now to then. Front matter plus the bluffs and prominences, taller than the ornate tower on the municipal building. I'll read just 1 more from this, then I'll go to the other book. This is a tiny one called Eiffel's. Small ones from the 96th Street crosstown bus, to be boarded if and only if the aggressively cantilevered building racing to enclose the sky over Broadway, the way enclosure invaded England as early as the 12th century, is the world view. Doucement, por favor. Okay. I think I'll read 3 things from this book. They are a little longer. This is called Crépuscule with Paula. The title's from Thelonious Monk. Does realism get your vote? It gets mine. The plants with their insatiable thirst for appearances. The heart-stopping 7 p.m. air moonlighting as a pressed cardboard Korean ashtray, server, modest coaster, decorated with a single blondish branch holding 6 leaves and a piece of rose-colored fruit, pear, plum, ripe peach, slightly raised, as if applied to the flat, creamy space behind, flecked with light gray, light green, and brown marks of varying size, from pinpricks to ashes, pencil, it looks like, to brush. The romance of the window panes, I'm squinting a little, has nothing to do with the misguided view, the one with the fates schmoozing under the maroon awning of the high-rise. Schmooze, the C-H-M-O-O-S, is more like it. And the embarrassed-looking sycamores revealing, for all they're worth, in their slightly fictionalized but emotionally accurate way, which contributes to the overall tone without detracting from the realistic participation. A motorbike taking the corner too fast, a cat knowing the worst that can possibly happen and managing to avoid it, which could be the key signature, if not for a freestanding radiance just outside, unmoored, a hint of plum or Anjou pear. This is called Desk, and it was written for Kenneth Koch, in memory of Kenneth Koch, who started me in this business as he started Ron. Pretty much. Desk. I'm the whole desk, the couch for everything. Desk from above. I'm the varnished top. Don't write about me. Varnish. The daylight's wish, realism's splash. Disc, D-I-S-K. Oh, so sûr. Olivetti, lettera 32. I'm not Italian, I'm from Spain, but I remain the writer's writer's writer. Jaw-shaped stapler. I remind myself of the old U of Alabama and later NFL QB Ken, the snake, Stabler. Post-it, the poster boy of the past. Box of Post-its. Cherry, lime, eggplant, squash, banana, tangerine, and every other food color known to humans. Gooseneck lamp with clamp. What are you trying to hide? Paperclip. I join things at the hip. 1-inch paper clamp. Democracy has to turn its eye on itself periodically if it is to function politically, socially, economically, ethically, even, many would say, logically. Coffee mug. I am the coffee's mug, the brain's kisser. Saucer. Although virtually invisible in the normal course of things, I never think of myself as infra-dig. Drawer, in quotes. I am the one and only drawer-like space underneath the hinged piano lid of a top, the score for inner voices, the artist along with the model, brushes, tubes of paint, and various mediums, oh, moose of possible worlds. Metal mesh wastebasket. As everyone knows, the task is to get around me. Digital alarm clock. I don't hate you, I try to remain neutral. Words from KK. In a 3x5 spiral notebook with a green cover, 1967. The poem I meant to write. Love me or leave me and let me be lonely. Postcards taped to the wall behind. Vladimir Mayakovsky, Pee Wee Herman, the avenue at Middle Harness. That's what that is. The cover of La Doublure by Raymond Roussel, excerpt from Dorothy Wordsworth's journals, Still Life with Fruit and Vegetables by Cotin, Chambre de Stéphane Mallarmé, Superbia by Bruegel, etc. The perfect poem. I'm the perfect poem inside the desk, though not in the shallow drawer-like space underneath the top, not taped to the wood or the metal hinge, and not accessible while the desk exists in its present form. Typewriter ribbon. I am the inky tabula rasa, the red carpet for the poem to come. Blue plastic box with stamps, ink pad, return address stamp, pilot pen, and pocket calculator. The desk's corner mailbox. File cabinet. If wishes were horses, false starts would be secretariat. Photo of Jimmy Schuyler in his 20s. I'm the desk's inspirations, hearts, springtime. The poet's poets, Eiffel Towers, vistas, meadow, strewn with early crocuses and dandelion. Scotch tape and scissors. Highly rated surgical team. Words from KK number 2. John Ashbery prefers to sneak out of a poem. I'm going to skip a couple and go near the end. NYU retractable ballpoint pen, gift from Mike. Washington Square Park, framed in the moment's leafy plein air. Keats paperweight. I am the one with the well-known Severn portrait. I wish I could, but I can't prevent ideas for poems or anything else from blowing away. Okay. The poem that, or one of the poems, I think he told me this, Anselm was reading in the park that day, was the title poem of this book, Everything. And I thought I would fast read just the first section of it and then stop. It's got a terrific epigraph by George Harriman, the crazy cat person. And it's titled Everything, the poem. Everything is just nothing repeating itself. 1, there are 4 sections. I'll read the first. Stop me if you've heard this one. 2 llamas poke their heads out of the small stone enclosure, part of a garage, they spend their time in, when they're not taking the sun in a tiny fenced-in yard dotted with wildflowers. Just as we turned to look, a small flock of wild turkeys materialized out of nothing and began squawking clearly at us. Who knew they were the concierge family? Everything gusts and then dies back down. At least as likely, everything exists inside a giant thought balloon, which rides continual gusts, although no one can possibly speak about, let alone contemplate, the situation. As to the air outside the balloon, spangled with oak leaves and high strips of white clouds, let's leave that one for now. As the beaver said to the log, half in, half out of water, getting to know you, getting to know all about you. Speaking of balloons, the image I've always liked from as far back as high school is the lead one, successful as a lead balloon. It took off like a lead balloon. The fact that it got off the ground at all, before plummeting with a thud, if not a loud crash, does a good job of encapsulating human striving wedded to human failure. Not certainly that the conjunction is inevitably the case, but the poignancy, to me anyway, is palpable. As to the light from outside that must penetrate the thought balloon, regardless of its color or degree of translucence, that too seems best left for later, like playing 2 sets of tennis following a bout of pneumonia. Or the view of Niagara that nobody has. What did the 20-ounce bottle of Perrier say to the late afternoon sunlight, struggling to get indoors? The apartment building has more openings than the sprawling cemetery on the way to the dump upstate, or the one littering the heavily trafficked Manhattan approach to the RFK, formerly Triborough Bridge. You'd think the fumes by themselves would be a discourager. You say tomato, and I say everything is consumed by its appearances. I've been instructed to push a handful of minor characters back into the wings, but they won't go, no matter how hard I try. The pencil line between being and not being, hardly static however it looks. More accurately, between staying put and erupting into feelings that can't be held in check no matter what. Like the corruption built into medical advertising aimed directly at the TV viewing public. Reminds me of the boundary line between so-called feeling and so-called understanding. To have a purchase on, know thoroughly by close contact with or long experience of, as opposed to hearsay or even legitimate authority. As the great poet Mayakovsky sidestepped at least some of the more sinister aspects of futurism, only to fall victim to himself, as well as comrades who didn't mean nearly as well as they should have. So time fights off just about every conjunction, those with palpable connections to space, as well as just about any others you can name. There goes one now. No, it's a bird batting by. In fact, the sky, as well as Stevens remarked of the world just prior to the onset of World War II, in contrast to T.S. Eliot, whom Stevens somewhat surprisingly singles out for praise, is growing floppier. Warped tent poles and stakes, an occasional scrawny pigeon on the wing, one roof garden with a flapping umbrella, which from the back looks like Our Lady of the George Washington Bridge. But no cloud structure for support unless you count the grayish wisps, barely clouds, that hung around the Palisades for most of the morning. Actually, the view is appealing, provided it doesn't decide to go too far in the direction of floppiness and risk falling over into the appearance of whatever is holding it up, a girder or pylon, or some idea of structure per se that hasn't yet been instantiated. Speaking of support, I've had a hard time forgetting about the guy in our building who I used to see going for his run every morning before breakfast, who jumped from his 10th floor window and magically survived. Seriously broken bones, but alive, apparently because he landed in a tiny courtyard on a bale of recycled newspapers, primarily the New York Times. Does that qualify as the ethical sphere? Maybe just. Yesterday morning, just before I woke up, a few persons with backpacks and what looked like metal maps several inches thick were bobbing up and down on platforms that looked like ice floes, but more cork than ice. Every once in a while, one of them went over with a silent splash. Suicide is one of the silent E words, but so are cope and rosette, inchoate, baseline, nape. Here's one. How many singularities can fit onto the head of a pin pushed into the so-called bulletin board of consciousness? Cork again, but not a real theme, I'm pretty sure. As distinct from the riptides, sinkholes, tsunamis, you name it, occasionally just a tone row or cluster, that emerge, seemingly out of nothing, to manhandle the attention principle and hold on for what can seem, and in some cases be, hours or even entire days. So how best to use one's time, which in one very large sense is everything, is at best a conundrum worth examining, and at worst the exam and the dream, with all the silent percussion, in the course you've never signed up for. Although everyone else is scribbling away at their desks next to their green lamps, the lagniappe being somewhat on the order of dusk, an apparently new range of colors, intonations, shapes, etc., which is familiar and also entirely out of the blue. Thank you.
Great. We will take a 5-minute intermission and then be back with Ron Padgett, and reminding all our virtual viewers that there is, you can donate through Venmo to Segue, and all the proceeds go to the readers. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Charles. That was great. Sorry, I'll let people. Okay, now we're going to have Ron read and Anselm. I'm not sure where you are. Oh, I'm going to welcome Anselm back to introduce Ron.
is going to take a long time. It's weird that this room has this kind of column and then these things over here. I guess y'all feel more Greco-Roman over on this side. I lent an undergrad poet I'm working with at Pratt Institute a copy of Ron's book, Great Balls of Fire. She loves it, so I'm worried I'm not going to get it back. Don't lend Ron's books. One time, my brother and I were hanging out in San Francisco, and he read me this poem, which he never published. I'm sorry about this, Eddie. And the first two lines were something like, sometimes I get into a mood, and then I build a hammock there. And then it just kind of goes on. It's like, all right, you're reading Ron's poems. Sometimes when I want to demonstrate how a poem can take its time, unfold as a train or stroll of thought before suddenly becoming a dizzying, super fast cycle of transformation, that's longhand for saying sometimes when I want to blow somebody's mind, I give them his poem First Drift to read. Ron Padgett grew up in Tulsa. Has lived mostly in New York since 1960. Has translated the works of Guillaume Apollinaire, Pierre Reverdie, and Blaise Cendrars from French into English, among others. His own work's been translated into 18 languages. His work as an editor, translator, teacher, prose writer, collaborator, goes back a long time. There's millions of examples of it out there. All of it should be looked up, could be looked up. Even, or not even, but there are books that Ron edited for Teachers and Writers Collaborative, where he worked for a long time, that remain invaluable. I'm thinking of the Handbook of Poetic Forms, in which all the entries are written by poets, and it's meant for teachers of high schools, but as an introduction to form, how many there are, how many there can be, just as an attempt to kind of make a perimeter around all these possibilities. It's a beautiful book and a useful book. What I trying to write an introduction for you is a funny thing to do. I know, I'm sorry. When I was reading all these blurbs on the back of this book, Alone and Not Alone, some of them say boy. I'm like, what? I think Ron is tall. I think what I want to say about Ron's work is something that has to do with clarity, utter clarity, although I'm never sure I know what that means, utter or clarity. So to put them together is to bring some tension to clarity. It's not really what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking clarity is a way to set up transformation. In Ron's poems, things just happen, often suddenly. And why not? It's a poem. The record might say this has something to do with comic books, cartoons, French surrealist poetry, translation, editing the White Dove Review as a teenager in Tulsa in the 1950s with a dad who's a bootlegger, and then going forward from there into the 60s. Ron's work is built into the fabric of my imagination as it comes true in language. Please welcome Ron Padgett.
Thank you, Anselm. And thank you to Segue, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to read in two distinct sections. First, from a memoir that I've written about the poet Dick Gallup, which will be published in a couple of months by Cuneiform Press. It's a full-length memoir, and trying to select from it was very hard. In fact, this morning I had the impulse to read the whole book to you, but it would take 8 hours. So I decided to just focus on Dick's, when he first met Ted Berrigan, and then focus on Ted as a friend and something of a mentor and a colleague, and then how they both ended up in New York City and had a very intense and fruitful friendship. And I'll skip over the parts where Dick and I meet when I'm 8 years old and he's 9 years old, and I'm going to skip the part after he left New York too. His story is really fantastic, I think, and maybe it's because he was my friend for 70 years that makes me think that, but I don't think so. He was something else. Anyway, I'll start out with the summer of 1959 in Tulsa, where Dick and Joe Brainerd and I are buddies, and we have met this college fellow named Ted Berrigan, who turns out is starting to write poetry too. And but in the summer of 1959, Dick and Joe Brainerd and I rented an old garage apartment located at 444 South Delaware, near the Tulsa University, and a few blocks from where Dick and I lived. At $40 a month, this two-room dump had seen better days. It hadn't been painted for years, and the only furniture seems to have been salvaged from a junk shop. A metal bed frame with sagging springs and a lumpy mattress, a rickety wooden table, and a few mismatched chairs. The only cooking involved toast and coffee. This decrepit place might have been acceptable for a penniless student, but for us, it was an exciting crash pad with an underground Raskolnikovian allure to it. Joe painted a life-size nude on the wall, but despite appearances, nothing nefarious went on. People drifted in, hung out, drifted out. Ted Berrigan was an occasional visitor, talking with gusto about Thomas Wolfe and George Bernard Shaw. We were all excited about a new book by Colin Wilson called The Outsider. Dick was a year older than me. He went off to college and to Tulane in New Orleans. But in 1959, he returned to Tulsa during the Christmas and New Year's holidays. And though he had called up a number of girls for dates, he hadn't been able to bring himself to make out with any of them, even the one who seemed willing. However, being in Tulsa briefly had been intellectually stimulating, particularly the significant time he spent with Ted Berrigan and Jim Sears, another Tulsa University student, who was the conduit for Benzedrine, by the way. You'll learn all the lurid details in this, Berkeley. In June of 1961, Dick had done a couple of years at Tulane. In June of 61, Dick wrote this, an untitled poem, never been published or anything, that we go about in our own heart's way, that the will of others does not touch us, that lingering in our own spirit we say that it is good, the nearness, the close calling for us. Shortly afterward, Dick, going his own heart's way, he headed to New York City, where he stayed that summer in a Lower East Side apartment with Ted Berrigan, a dark one-room space that connected to a kitchen they shared with their subterranean neighbor, the building's superintendent, a scrawny old fellow named Willie, who periodically complained that, hey, somebody's been eating my cornflakes again. This building at 5 Willett Street no longer exists. The only charm of the place was the sound of a cantor singing in the synagogue next door, though the atmosphere was brightened considerably when Ted's girlfriend from Tulsa, Pat Mitchell, joined them. For relief from the summer heat, the three of them would go for late-night walks on the nearby Williamsburg Bridge, where sometimes they heard a guy with obvious talent playing jazz saxophone. Years later, they learned it was Sonny Rollins. And then at a certain point, Dick was starting to talk more and more like Ted, which was to happen to a number of Ted's future acolytes. But Ted, in subtler ways, was being influenced by Dick as well. Dick's cast of mind was interesting and original, and he would often reply to Ted's assertions with an unexpected take of his own. It's really telling how often Dick's name pops up in the poems Ted wrote in the early 1960s, especially in the sonnets. So Dick went back to Tulane, and in February of 1962, who appears? Ted Berrigan, out of nowhere. And they're walking across the campus one evening, Ted and Dick, and Dick was feeling slightly depressed, and he said, I sure would like to get out of this damn town sometime. And Ted replied, well, why don't you leave? Beginning back in '59, when Dick was a senior in high school, he started growing closer and closer to Ted. Although not yet the Ted Berrigan he became in New York, he was already charismatic, an expansive Irish-American conversationalist who tended to take younger people under his wing and advise them at length about life and literature. In the late 1950s, Ted's brain was charged with ideas and enthusiasms, even when it wasn't energized by amphetamine. Dick, Joe Brainerd, and I were among the first young people to be charmed by this Pied Piper. Two others were Ted's 8th grade students at the parochial school where he was teaching, a boy named Tony Walters and a young woman named Christine Murphy, the Chris of Ted's sonnets. At the time, Ted was also obsessing over his master's thesis called The Problem of How to Live as Dealt with in 4 Plays by George Bernard Shaw. At that point in Dick's life, the problem of how to live was central, and he found in Ted someone who, if he couldn't help him figure out things fully, at least offered an exit from his present circumstances. For myself, I admired and respected Ted a lot, but from the start, something made me push back against his influence, albeit gently. But Dick's usual reaction to Ted was not to resist, but when necessary, as Dick put it, I just went out the back door. Early on in their relationship, Dick accepted Ted's harsh, sometimes harsh, lecturing as simply part of his cathartic method. But I, as someone who always wanted to feel in control of situations, sought at his hectoring, though I knew full well that Ted was perceptive in ways that I wasn't. By 1962, Ted's gravitational pull on Dick had started to lose its force, though they remained good friends, and in subsequent years, Ted continued to deliver both encouragement by publishing Dick in the first issue of C magazine in 1963 and in subsequent issues. But Ted also offered the kind of blunt criticism that only a friend can get away with, as noted by Dick in a journal entry. Dick wrote. He wrote this in January of 1965. Time to mention a few nasty comments by Ted, which as usual have their grain of truth. I was thinking yesterday that Ted has a certain type of perception which makes his remarks on about anything brilliant, but always wrong. He said to me the other night, "What's wrong with your poetry is that it's frivolous." He mentioned my play, The Bingo, which he hasn't read, and said that he saw it could never be a work. And then in actually earlier journal entry, 1963, Dick wrote about what he saw as his and Ted's fundamental difference. Ted has always said that he has never had any trouble knowing that he was, just a matter of what. I, of course, know that I don't know that I am. The what doesn't worry me very much. Dick was really central to the whole poetry community around the St. Mark's Church in the later 60s. Here's an excerpt from a diary he wrote in 1968, just about one day. I was just over to the church, St. Mark's, helping Ron, Ann Waldman, and Peter Sheldall, run off Mike Brownstein's new book, Behind the Wheel. They had got only 4 pages done when I had to leave, it being midnight, etc. Actually, I spent a great deal of time today, Sunday, gadding around to everyone's house. First, I took his daughter, Christina, to dig the snow, and then went to Ron's. He said he was going over to Ted's to get the cover for Mike's book and to watch a little football. So off we went, and we met David Shapiro coming down the street with his friend Larry Weeder. They had a car, wow. And we got out of the freezing cold, 20 degrees with 30-mile-per-hour winds, and over to Ted's. Quickly we left him, Ted just getting up, breakfast time, and went to the Victory Deli for hot dogs. Back to Ron's for coffee, and George Schneemann wandered in from the cold. I tried to convince him to come down to play a game of chess, but he chose to remain in the warmth of Ron's house and play chess with Ron. I came home then and ate dinner, played with Chrissy, and read some more awful poetry. And then at 10 p.m., I went over to Peter's and ate dinner again. Wonderful. And just as we finished, Ron came in to pick up the paper for Mike's book, sitting in Pete's dining room, and to pick us up as it turned out. So I'm back home again at 12:30 a.m., eating social tea, biscuits, and drinking Pepsi. Saturday night, we went to a party at Kenward Elmsley's house, 12th night party, and saw all the old folks of New York literature, Kenneth Koch, John Ashbery, Jimmy Schuyler, etc. And Dick had I won't react too much about that. This is just about reading and writing and being published. It's a whole chapter. And again, here's a journal entry from 1963. Ted gave me a copy of Robert Lebel's book on Duchamp for my birthday, which I am slowly reading. Most of the poems I will send, I'm sorry, this is a letter to me. It's not a journal entry, it's a letter he wrote to me. Most of the poems I will send to you with this letter are sort of indirectly inspired by Duchamp. Reading about Duchamp's never doing anything with much beauty in it has had the effect on me of making me want to do something, so I get out my typewriter and write a poem. More simply, Duchamp's a real inspiration. The only figure that I have run across recently actually does move me to get off my ass and do something. Also makes me think. And in the same letter, Dick said, I have a new theory of poetry, which goes, I am God, you are an archangel. From that, unbelievable results follow. The only flaw is that being God gets a little sticky. Being a conscientious God, you can't say, so to hell with that.
because by your heavenly decree, that's exactly what would happen, and hence you lose a lot of the humor. And then later that month, he wrote, my method at present is to write something that I am unsure of, and to do away somewhat, as much as I can, with my eternal plots. Also, I am obsessed with the line. This is a rub-off from Ted's sonnets. It interests me a great deal how he manages to have each line a definite autonomy, both metrically and psychologically. Both come somewhat from his method of juggling, but it is much more than that. To do without or to exclude a narrative thread in a poem is, at least for me, nearly impossible. I lose my footing and fly into a million pieces, none of them worth quoting here. Ted manages to spread himself extremely thin without breaking up. I get from it something of the sense of tremendous distances, interstellar distances, from his poems that I get from the last part of Parade's End. In a letter to me in 1963 again, the whole problem of intellectual, spiritual, rational, even moral tautness intensity often worries me. The degree of intensity shown in some works is fantastic. I read somewhere about someone, I think a poet, was it Rilke, Apollinaire, that he was, quote, completely conscious at every moment of his life. Such a thought literally appalls me. But by 1965, Dick was riding a high of self-confidence. And he wrote in a letter to me in December of 65, I read on WKCR last night via tape made last week. Freaked my mind listening to me read my own works. I read a little from The Bingo, his play, a couple of poems, and 4 of the prose poems I worked on in September and October. They read like works of utter genius. They come out better than they look, I think. Anyway, very inspiring and all that jazz, jazz, jazz. But at the same time, there was the worrisome matter of the public reception of his work. And his dismay about this came to the fore in a letter he wrote to me in 1966, in which he raised an issue that, though it's shielded in irony, it does raise a troubling question. He wrote to me, alas, why am I not recognized as the giant among the minds of my generation that I am? And he followed this by, maybe I should use more deodorant. And I'm going to read one more little excerpt here from this, and then I'm going to read some poems. In 1970, he was talking about something he called poetic logic, which he described as always personal in nature, but which must be somehow made to come across by the language you use to other people who don't share your own logic. I suppose you could say this is a problem of getting people to identify with the poem by one means or another, getting people to partake of your own logical structure. The means of doing this are usually more evident than the actual thoughts conveyed. It comes out as technique. Hence, Larry Fagan gets us into his poems by being coy and laconic. Ron operates by wit, strange juxtapositioning, and dry humor. Ted, by alternately shouting at the top of his voice and whispering tenderly, a sort of poetic interrogation team. Kenward Elmsley uses grace plus strange conglomerates of sound which set off one another beautifully. Kenneth Koch uses blinding wit, usually in conjunction with verbal pyrotechnics. John Ashbery uses a sly under and over statement, his form of wit, together with an elegance of logical construction that no one can match. It's kind of like LSD. Jimmy Schuyler uses lyrical grace and simplicity. All these forms of aesthetic beauty. All these are forms of aesthetic beauty in the sense that they attract the reader. It's like the carrot held out to the rabbit that I've always seen as so obvious in Shakespeare. A sort of con game of appearances to get the reader in a place where you can blow his mind. I think that anyone who has given many readings of poetry will see the truth of this. So much of a reading is manipulation of the audience, gaining their confidence so that they will not resist you when you twist their minds a bit. That may seem a strange segue into my reading poems of my own. I'm sorry? So I'm now going to, probably read too long, I'm going to read too long, but here are some poems of mine, fairly new, last couple of years, and they're going to come out in a book called Pink Dust about a year from now, from New York Review Books. They're mostly short. Every time I approach a blank page, the poems in it shout, "Oh no, here he comes again. Run!" I grab at them as they flee like terrified little bugs. Gotcha. There used to be an eraser in the shape of a wheel, pink, attached to a little brush, black, for erasing pencil words and then brushing away the residue, a little pink dust, though I preferred to brush it away with my hand or to puff up my cheeks and blow it away. I'd like to replay all those moments in my life, one after the other, in a film to be called A History of Pink Dust. Star Joe. Joe said, "The reason I'm a painter is because I'm not a movie star. The reason I'm a poet is because I'm not a zebra. I am, though, for a moment, caught inside the word zebra, Z to A. And as I alternate from inside this page to outside it, inside, out, and so on. Joe, a movie star? He was a star, period. Imagine editing a book and calling it An Anthology of French Poets from Nerval to Valery in English Translation. Such a one appeared in 1958. Imagine you are a young poet who bought it a few years later for $1.45, read it cover to cover, delighted, transported, and sometimes bored by it. Imagine that many years later, a friend tells you the editor was his uncle. Imagine that you are the mouse who nibbled a lace mark along the edge of the cover. Imagine that you are the book itself, standing on a shelf for 40 years, and then someone takes you down, holds you, opens you, and falls in love again with you. This is called And Where It Lands. When I was 10 years old, I set up a target in our backyard, and from the front yard, I shot arrows over the roof. You'd be surprised how quickly a kid can get good at it. This was a skill that later served me well when I faced the challenges of adult life. It helped me never to become adult. Seesaw. I'm trying to remember why I enjoyed playing on the teeter-totter, going up and down endlessly. I think I liked only going up, though if I let myself come down real hard enough to bang the ground, it made the other child fly up off the seat and scream. When, from bed, I thought to ask my wife to turn off the light, she walked across the room without my saying a word and turned off the light. What a joy, this strange new power I have over her. This is called Robert Creeley. A few years before his death, Robert Creeley gave a reading of his poetry at the Casa de las Americas in Paris. And near the end of it, he said, I'm going to read some new work now, all of it plain old doggerel. It was. As he read, he seemed half amused, half embarrassed. I cringed with a weird delight. It was the most avant-garde thing I had seen in a long time. The people gave each other furtive looks. Recently, I wrote a poem that said that making scones was a good thing to do. It could not have been more commonplace. The first poems I remember reading came from books like Best Beloved Poems of the American People. The gingham dog and the calico cat side by side on the table sat. But there is no joy in Mudville, mighty Casey has struck out. And then the one about the cremation of a man named Sam McGee. I was around 13. I thought some of them were pretty good. And the road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor. Terrific. But what's a moor exactly? I see Bob's face in the moonlight. He taps with his whip on the shutters. Against the grain. Once in a museum, I saw the Bible on a grain of rice, displayed under a microscope. I saw words, but I wasn't going to stand there and read the entire Bible. I've never stood anywhere long enough to read the entire Bible. In fact, I've never read the entire Bible. This morning, though, I did eat a bowl of rice with hot milk, sugar, butter, and salt. That's a lot of Bibles I ate. I sat around until it was dark and had a cigarette, the same one I smoked in 1958 in a hotel room in Mexico late at night, with 12 teenage girls smoking Mexican cigarettes and laughing into the smoke of each other's breaths. It was a Delgado, slightly flattened and with pinstripes running along its length, that went all the way to a little Mexican infinity inside me. A brief guide to 20th century American poetry. Pound was a verb, Eliot a noun. They sentenced us to modernity. Williams was a definite article. Williams was a definite article. Stevens a what? Stein was a paragraph, and then a paragraph. Stein a paragraph. I mean a wall. Guess what? I still like them all. As a young adult, I found my heart beating in odd rhythms whenever I drank a cup of coffee, so I stopped. In those days, it was almost impossible to get decaffeinated coffee in Europe, so it was sad to be in a cafe in Paris. or a bar in Rome, though the sadness had a beauty of its own. Many decaffeinated years went by, and I found myself in Vienna, alone, in the elegant old coffee house of the Hotel Segue. And I let go with a full bore cup and a soccer tort, and I lit up like a palace full of sparkling people. And there was Lenin over there, and Freud, and psychoanalysis, and history rising into the air, hazy with the smoke of cognition. And I knew that finally I was in a world I had been longing for without even knowing it. As a young man, I wanted to live a long time so I could know what it feels like to be old. Now, I'm trying to remember what it feels like to be young. Young, old, young. Do you need more proof of how ridiculous I am? If so, look inside yourself, for you are just like me. There is nothing more ridiculous than a human being. The rest of nature doesn't know this. It's our little secret. What is it that, in the face of death, lets you find yourself sitting in a chair with happiness all around you, and in you, and of you, as if you were a dog and your master is patting your head and telling you how good you are forever? I'm sure I'm not the only person my age who is still asking the same questions about existence that I asked in adolescence. But sometimes, when I look at the faces of people my age, all I see is loaves of bread, smiling, as if baking had been a great pleasure. Forever enough. I put some stamps on the envelope, maybe enough, I don't know. The post office should accept it as is, because I made an effort. The post office should look at the envelope and say, well, he made an effort. In my sleep, I caressed you. And when I woke up, I caressed the memory of the dream. I never caressed you in real life. I never even wanted to, though I was close to liking the idea of caressing you. If I had caressed you, I would remember it, which is what I did last night. I noticed a black thing, a crumb of chocolate cake, a single mouse dropping, and for a moment, I didn't want it to be there on my desk. So I flicked it off onto the floor. Now it's down there. Wonder what it is. Snow falling from gray sky. It's time to bake. Scones, I mean. And right out of the oven, take one and butter it with jam, teapot hot at hand, and then exult in the face of everything horrible. A haiku went up into a tree and sat there on a limb it had just made up. A bottle of champagne doesn't appear on your lawn every day, but one did today, standing upright, silent in the air, swirling with snow. It came from a poem by William Carlos Williams that does not exist. And then it flew through space and time to land here, softly, on my lawn, with no message inside, just bubbles. I just took out a ruler and measured the dictionary that I had guessed was 7 by 5 by 2 inches. And guess what? It was. I banged the ruler on the desk and called out, "Yes, yes, yes." The small, sad pleasure of being right. So 3 more. I keep trying to have a crush on every attractive woman I see, but all I can do is remember what a crush was and how it felt being wagged around by it, if only for a moment or two. It was fun, that motion, unlike love, which is not fun. It can tear your head off. A blue hen and a yellow egg appeared on the piece of paper and then disappeared. Where did they come from? And where go? Why do I have to ask? I should just be glad they came to see me in beautiful blue and yellow. And last one. There has to be something I can tell you that will make you happy with the idea of being alive, oh citizens. I feel it somewhere in my body, where I don't know. If only my body could disappear, that one thing would drop onto the ground, where you could pick it up and stare at its words, written in a language no one understands, but which brings joy, a quiet, crazy joy without end. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron and Charles. That was amazing. Join us next week. We have our next segue is with Harmony Holiday and Taylor Johnson. Thank you, everyone. Good night.